Hey everyone, I'm so excited to be doing another podcast interview, and I am so pleased to welcome Courtney Millecam on the podcast. Courtney Millecam writes fantasy books with atmospheric settings, magic, girls with swords, swoony love interests, and heart pounding adventure. When she's not writing, you can find her spending time with her family, enjoying the mountains near her home, or curled up reading with a Dr. Pepper in hand. So, welcome, Courtney.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, I cannot wait to do this interview because we've known each other for a long time. I love
Mhm.
following you on Instagram, and I still remember a while back, I think it was before you published, you were talking about the Never Era and how it was like a
Mhm.
1920s historical fantasy. And I am a total sucker for that genre and that time period. So I was so thrilled and was like, I need to read this book. So it was so exciting when you released the Never Era and I got to read it. And it was so wonderful. So, and I've had the pleasure of meeting you in person at conferences and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's been just so fun getting to know you. And yeah, I'm just so happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'd love to talk about the Never, but first, I would love to learn more about your writing journey. I know I've heard a bit, but I'd love for our listeners to get to know you. So start with when you
Sure.
started writing and what that journey's been like.
So I think like a lot of writers, I first started writing, when I was really young. I had a stint in elementary school and I was like writing like Babysitter's Club fan fiction, basically is what it was. And then as I got older, my studies took over, being a mother took over, and then after I had my second baby, um, I had an opportunity to stay home and I kind of turned to writing as like my escape. That was something like just for me. So like when my kids were napping, after they had gone to bed, I would, kind of immerse myself in these like imaginary worlds. And so that's when I wrote my very first book. And really that book was like a testament to me that like I could do this. I had never thought that I could ever write a book like from start to finish before. And so that was like a huge confidence builder. And after I wrote that book, I decided to learn more about the craft of writing and learning more about like the publishing side of writing, what it would take to be published. So I started going to writing conferences and I started, getting books that I could study on my own and, researching things and reaching out to other authors and kind of building that writing community. That book that I wrote back in 2013 will never ever see the light of day. Like it was just that kind of exploratory book. But then after that, that's when I got the idea for the Never Air. And at the time, my kind of goal was to be traditionally published. And so I would pitch it at writing conferences. I would send out query letters. I spent 2 years trying to query the Never Air. Finally, in 2020, at a writing conference, I pitched it to an agent who asked me to send him the full manuscript. I sent him the full manuscript, and then he actually reached out with a phone call, which is always exciting, and offered me representation. So I was repped through him for a year from 2000, like about August 2020 to July 2021. And obviously, that was probably not an ideal time to be repped by an agent, just with the COVID pandemic happening and like publishing kind of is in a weird kind of phase where they weren't taking on a ton of new authors. And it was just kind of a weird time, but I was still pretty optimistic. And we had a really great response from other publishing houses and editors. I got lots of requests. But then what it just came down to was their two main concerns, which I thought were so kind of silly looking back now, but their two main concerns were one, they weren't sure how readers would react to a young adult novel not set in the United States because mine takes place in London, which is kind of silly to me
Oh,
that that would be one of their concerns. The other concern that they had was that during 2020 to 2021, there had been kind of like a slew of Peter Pan retellings published. Disney Hyperion had just published like Straight On Till Morning around that time. And then Aidan Thomas's Lost in the Neverwoods had just gotten picked up by Macmillan. And so that was feedback too. Well, we like your story, we're interested, but, and then they would reference these other books and kind of worry how it would do like competition wise. Um, so after a year of trying to get this book published, it was really disheartening to not have it get picked up. And basically, when you submit a book to publishers and it's been, turned down, there's nothing you can really do with it after that. My agent was like, we can try again, like with a different book, and then maybe The Never Air can be like your sophomore novel. But basically, it just had to die on my computer, and that just didn't sit well with me. And so after my agent and I parted ways, I just decided, you know what, I am going to publish this. Like, I believe in it. Like, in my gut, I knew that The Never Air needed to be my debut. It had such great response from my beta readers. It honestly had good response from publishers, aside from those things that they had mentioned. And so I'm like, you know what, I am going to go for this. And so that's when I started looking into publishing independently. And that's when turned to my friends in the writing community, because I'm like, you guys, I need help with this. I've never looked into this before. And they were great to kind of rally behind me and help me get this book launched.
Wow, that's quite the journey you went through with like, yeah, getting an agent and then just having it just kind of fall through. But I like that you just stuck to what you felt was right. You just thought The Never Error is meant to be my debut book. And
Mhm.
I'm so glad you didn't give up on it.
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's a lot of there's a lot that we can put into like following like our gut instincts. I think that sometimes as authors we hear stories about maybe you get pushed around or you get, convinced to do something or to publish a certain way that, maybe isn't right for you. And yeah, I really feel like I owe a lot of, my publishing journey to that. Yeah, just following my instincts and just knowing that yes, this book is meant to be published one way or another.
Right. And do you still keep in contact with that agent or have you guys parted ways?
Very loosely, like we parted very amicably. Like our contract was just for a year. And so then after that, we, could decide if we wanted to continue or not. And we decided not to. And so, yeah, I feel like we still have a good relationship. I'm not super in touch with him as of the last few years when I've been working on getting my series out. But I feel like if I ever had questions or if I had another project that I maybe at a future date wanted to send to him, I feel like that line of communication for sure is open.
That's really nice. And do you see yourself sticking to the more independent publishing route or do you see yourself possibly going hybrid?
I don't know. There's things that I love about independently publishing. There's also obviously there's things that I think I would love about traditionally publishing. Young adults, just from everyone I've heard, is just so tricky right now. It's so competitive. Agents and publishing houses are so selective on what they will accept. And so I feel like if I'm passionate about my books and I want them out there, um, then I might continue on, the indie publishing route. But I'm definitely not going to say never. I'll never try and pursue traditional publishing again. I will just see how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I really like I think the idea of going hybrid is really appealing. I don't know, maybe just
Hmm.
because there's certain books you might feel like, oh, this would do really well in the independent publishing space. There are other books that would do well in the traditional space. So I like that.
Yeah.
I think that that's a good mix to be in. But of course, I haven't ever been in that space, so I wouldn't know what it's like
Yeah.
being a hybrid author.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems really nice. Okay, so let's talk about The Never Error. So give us just a brief pitch on what it's about.
Sure. So The Never Air is a 1920s Peter Pan retelling. It explores what happens to the Lost Boys after they leave Neverland. So it features Charlie, who's our former Lost Boy, who's now living in 1923 London. He's moonlighting as a boxer. He works at a grocery store. He meets Evie, a London socialite, and together they kind of go on an adventure to find Pan's lost relics of power and fulfill Evie's bargain that she made to kind of a trickster Fae in order to save her sister.
Ah, I love that. I love that premise. And something that I absolutely love, probably one of my favorite parts of the story, is the setting, the 1920s London. Absolutely love that. I'm wondering, what was your inspiration for deciding that to be the setting?
So I've always been fascinated with the 1920s. I feel like the time between the two world wars was such like an optimistic and hopeful time. I mean, obviously they had no idea what was coming in the future. I mean, they had just finished World War I. And so just that energy, the music, the innovations, all of that, the clothing, I've always loved all of that. I specifically chose London because as an American, I didn't know a lot about 1920s London until later in life, like my college years and things. And the more I learned about like London society and like all of their rules that they followed and the hierarchy of things, and it just like it fascinated me. It fascinated me that people would like dress in these evening gowns just to eat dinner with their family, and just things like that. And so I really wanted to learn more about that, incorporate that into a story. And then just the fact too that there's a lot of kind of homages to Peter Pan in London, so I wanted to kind of stay true to the original that way, that it was still set, in the UK.
I love that. Was there, so you said that you learned a bit more about London in that time period in college. Was there any extra research you needed to do when writing this book, or did you go based a lot on that experience?
No, I researched so much and I researched so much on UK websites that when I would log into my computer, my browser would automatically go to like .uk. Like it would just think that's where I was because I was always switching things to find information from like primary like UK sources. I did a lot of research. I mean, even just silly things like what would you stock in a 1920s grocery store, like for Charlie's job. So like all of the items that he's putting away on shelves, like those were real things that were in the 1920s.
Mm,
There were even kind of some crazy things about like I had to figure out like what would they eat for breakfast and like orange juice, like that was a new drink that had been kind of introduced in the 1920s, and people's reactions were very skeptical to orange juice. And so like Evie's mother, her reaction to drinking it at breakfast, like that's true to the time period. So there was
mm.
all kinds of little details that I ended up having to research.
Ah, that sounds like it's fun research because it's like, first of all, you're fascinated with that time period in
Yeah,
London. And I don't know, just those little details. Those are things that people don't really know about. And
yeah.
that's so fun.
Yeah,
I'm
I thought it was super fun. I had to always catch myself like not to go down like a huge rabbit hole and spend like hours and hours like looking at dresses and looking at shoes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like these people are not going to care that much about like when the buckle was invented or would it be a zipper or snaps and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to do that sometime because I do have an idea for a 1920s like London
Oh,
type story. So I'll knowing about like going to UK websites to do some research. I didn't know about that, so I might
yeah,
do that when I feel ready to write that book.
yeah.
Um, and then you mentioned Peter Pan, and I loved that you kept it to London, which, by the way, that's so strange that those publishers were like iffy about, you being an American
Yeah.
and the story takes place in London. I had no idea that that was like a thing that they considered.
Yeah, I don't know why they thought it would be a big deal because I think there's plenty of young adult stories, fantasy stories that don't take place in the United States. I don't
Yeah.
know. It was a weird kind of, I thought that same thing. I thought it was a strange thing to get hung up on.
Yeah. I'm like now going to be thinking about all these other books that I know of, and I'm like, is the author European or
Yeah,
like
well, and I
have
think
ties to
honestly, I
Europe?
think part of their things are because there's plenty of fantasies, right, that are like inspired by other countries or cultures, but the setting is still fictional. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think for it to be like a real place, I think
Oh,
maybe they felt like that would be more like in the historical fiction camp instead of like historical fantasy. I don't know. Maybe I'm
got
just
it.
speculating, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I could see that. So, but yeah, this is Peter Pan. And what was your like inspiration for like in process for making a reimagining of the Peter Pan story?
So I got the idea for this story while I was years ago. I was at the gym. I was running on the treadmill, and I had forgotten my headphones. And so over the gym loudspeakers, Ruth B's song "Lost Boys" came on. And so as I was running, it got me thinking about like the Lost Boys of Peter Pan. And then I got thinking, you know what? There's like Peter Pan reimaginings, but they always focus on like Peter Pan and Hook. And so I was like, hey, what if I take this idea for reimagining, but instead focus on the side characters? I had never seen that done before. It got me really excited, just all of the thinking and brainstorming of, what would this lost boy be like if he had just stepped out of Neverland into the real world? And then kind of bridging, the historical with the fantastical, and because, historical fiction is my other love besides fantasy. So to be able to bridge those two things together was like a dream come true for writing. Um, so then the ideas just started spinning on who these other characters might be, how I could bring in tidbits from the original, but still kind of come up with this mostly original story as far as Charlie and Evie and the adventure that they go on.
Yeah, I feel like reimaginings or doing retellings can be a little bit tricky sometimes because it's like, okay, what things from the original story can I pull in? What parts from my own unique like creativity can I
Mm-hmm.
pull in? So that's interesting that you chose to focus on the Lost Boys because it is true. I feel like they are a bit underrated and we don't see a lot of stories with them. So I really like that you
Yeah.
focused on what if one of them came to the real world. And so I really like that. Was there a ton of research you had to do in the original story of Peter Pan?
I mean, yes and no, only that I'm pretty familiar with the story. I think a lot of people at least know the basics. There are some differences from the book than from like the movie versions that we're familiar with. Um, and so that was really fun to me, is like to dig into the text and find some things. So for example, there in Neverland, there's like this archway portal, and above the archway, it says time is never planned. Like that is from the text. From Peter Pan. That's not from something that you would know from the movie. So it was kind of fun to sneak those little details in there. So that if you are familiar with like the original, Peter Pan story, that you would catch those and hopefully make that connection.
I love that. I would love to read the original story. I'm just so familiar with just what Disney has done, but Disney, even what
Mm-hmm.
they've told, is their own reimagining of it.
Right.
So, yeah, and that's why it's like so important to go to the original. But anyway, yeah, I'd love to read that story. And then I love the two main characters and I love that they come from different social classes. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious what made you decide you to go in that direction? And then what was your inspiration for like writing their relationship dynamic?
So I definitely am inspired by like the Downton Abbey series. I love that series. I think it's so well done. I think it does a fantastic job of showcasing what life was like in England, during those years, that the series takes place. And so I loved the idea of kind of showcasing in my book, The Never Air, kind of the two extremes, right? Like the socialite, the upper class who, is part of like London society, and then the other side of it, and how those two classes really didn't mix, or that it was kind of frowned upon for someone from the upper class to befriend, or heaven forbid, have a romantic relationship with someone that wasn't, the same status as them. And so I thought that made for a really interesting dynamic. And then I just liked the idea that, Charlie is coming from the Neverland, this fantastical place, and then what a juxtaposition for him to step into the real world and have him be like working class now, that he like has to really fight for his place in this new world that he's stepped into.
Yeah, I love exploring that too. Like, and Downton Abbey is one of my favorite shows, and I love that exploration. It's just, it can get complicated. It can be
Mm-hmm.
like, intriguing and just fun. So I really like that you explored that. And then their relationship of like meeting each other was really great. And I don't know. And there's something, I don't know why, there's something about reading that kind of setting and then have the boy be the one who's lower class. I don't know why. Like for
Mm-hmm.
some reason it's just appealing to me. And then having
Yeah,
him meet this high class lady and yeah, I just for some reason I just really love that.
yeah, yeah. I thought that would be like a good, like pairing of opposition. It also, I felt like, made a really interesting dynamic for his friendship with Edmund, right? So Edmund is
Hmm.
also a former lost boy, but when he comes into the real world, he does get in with like a wealthy family. And so then when those two meet, then there's kind of a little bit of jealousy. There's kind of a little bit of rivalry, and for different reasons too.
Hmm.
Like one's jealous of the other one's jealous for different things. And so it's kind of, yeah, it was kind of a fun way to explore kind of that dynamic.
I love that. Ah, I love it. And then just recently, you released the second book in this series, The Game
Mhm.
of Hearts. Can you tell us just a little bit about The Game of Hearts?
Yeah, so the Game of Hearts is book two. It's kind of almost like a spin-off of the Never Air. So it takes place about 6 weeks after the ending of the Never Air, and it focuses on Alice. Alice is a secondary character in the Never Air. She's Evie's friend, but it focuses on her and about her struggles. And she's also like the wealthy upper class, but she is kind of frustrated with her fate, with her destiny to marry this boy that her parents have been their family friends. And she just is really unhappy. She has dreams of her own. She wants to go to Paris and study fashion design. Um, but she knows that will never happen if she marries this boy. So she gets entangled, kind of roped into this game played by the Fae every year called the Game of Hearts. And it is a game where you can win a wish of your heart. So obviously she's going to play and she's going to try and change her fate. As she gets playing, she realizes the game is a lot more tricky and deadly than she was led to believe. So she has to team up with this kind of irreverent, snarky cat shifter. His name is Chess. And together they are playing against the Queen's champion player, who is Maddox. He is kind of slated to win the game. That's the expectation is on his shoulders to win the game on behalf of the Queen. And and then just kind of how they meet, how there's kind of like a rivals to lovers romance there, and just kind of everything that happens as they try to win this game and stay alive.
That's so cool. And it takes place in the same world as Never. He says like a spin-off.
Yes.
Do we see Evie and Charlie or Evie and Charlie from the first book in it at all? Or is this like following new characters and somehow there's going to be a tie-in?
Yeah, so there's definitely a tie-in. So they are mentioned in the very beginning, and a few times throughout, they kind of come up again. Um, and they do not really have, Charlie has a little bit of page time. Evie doesn't have any page time, besides just that she's just mentioned. Um, they will all, their story, both book one and book two, kind of merge together at the end. And then book three will be, you'll see Charlie and Evie come back as point of view characters. Alice comes back as a point of view character. And then it kind of all will wrap up in book three.
Huh, that's so interesting. I like that. And then the Game of Hearts is like Alice in Wonderland kind of
Yes.
reimagining. So you got
Yes.
Alice in Wonderland, you got Peter Pan. Both of them take place in London,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's so amazing. What made you want to do Alice in Wonderland?
So I originally actually was going to, like, when I was working with my agent, we marketed the Never Air as like a standalone.
Mm.
And in my opinion, like it has kind of like a happily for now ending. There's some loose threads in there. So like if it ever could be like, a series, it could have been. Um, but then I think I went to a class at a writing conference on um, like sequels and how to make them satisfying, whatever. So in the Never Air, my original draft of it, Alice's name was Hazel, and so I had
Mm.
never planned on doing any other books, like making it any other fairy tale retellings. And then as I kind of wanted to explore the world of the Never Air a little bit more, I thought, you know what? I am going to change Alice's name to Hazel. I'm going to have her own story. It's going to be Alice in Wonderland retelling, because to me, Neverland, Wonderland, and then the place where my third book takes place. All three of them to me seem like they kind of have like this, they're kind of set in these worlds that are equally frightening as they are whimsical. And so to me, it makes sense that they could all be part of the same shared world. And so anyway, that's kind of where where all of that stemmed from.
Wow. I love how it all ties, and I'm so curious. Is this other world, is this something that you made up, or is this one that we do
So it's going
know?
to be another retelling of a classic book.
Oh,
So
okay. I can't wait to find out. That'll be
huh.
exciting. All right. Well, that was just, I loved hearing all about that. And now I'm even more intrigued to pick up the Game of Hearts because that just sounds so good. And just the idea of like a game. I don't know why I was like thinking of like Caraval when you were talking.
Oh,
Maybe just
uh-huh.
because it has like a game that you play in it. But anyway, love that. And looking back on everything that you've been through with like, having an agent to deciding to indie publish and then this journey you've been on, what is one piece of advice you would tell your past self?
So I think for me, I wish that I wouldn't have waited so long to pursue publishing. I mean, and I mean that in both forms, indie and traditional. I think for me, I had these ideas for books. I probably spent, after I wrote the early drafts of The Never Air, I probably spent like 2 years, like just spinning my wheels on them as far as like, I would just like tinker on it, I would edit it. And I think for me, like procrastination was like almost like a coping mechanism because I was scared. I was unsure of myself. I wasn't sure how it was going to be received. And so I wish that I would have had more confidence just to go for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as writers, we don't have to have it all figured out, right? Like we don't have to have this path that's set in stone. We need to be flexible, and above all, we need to have the confidence in ourselves to make it happen, right? No matter how, what that ends up looking like. And so I wish I wouldn't have been like I said, so scared to take that initial first step. I mean, even just the step of sending it to critique partners, like took me forever because I was so nervous about, oh, are people going to like it? Like, what if I actually am terrible? Like I had all of these kind of imposter syndrome thoughts that really kept me from acting on anything for a long time.
I love that advice. So good. All right, let's get into some rapid fire questions. All right, what is your favorite trope?
Found family.
So good. Love Found Family.
Yeah.
What is your favorite writing snack/drink?
So my favorite writing drink is I love Dr. Pepper. I love adding different flavors to it, like coconut and lime, and kind of making like a fun little escape drink. And my favorite snack is I love the Boom Chicka Pop kettle corn, the one in the purple
Oh, yeah.
bag. Anyways, I love that.
That's really good. What is your favorite book currently?
So I recently discovered Amy Harmon book. So she's a historical fiction author. With she writes historical fiction with like a dash of romance. I recently discovered her, and now I'm on like a mission to read every book she's ever written.
Has she published a lot?
Yes, I'm not sure exactly the amount. I would dare say it's probably 10 or more, maybe books that she's written.
Okay. What is one book by her that is like your absolute favorite?
Okay, so I've actually only read two books by her, but I've loved them
Okay.
both. So I'm at the start of my like I'm gonna read all of her books. So I read A Girl Called Samson, which I absolutely love. It's about a girl who disguises herself as a boy during the Revolutionary War.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
the
You got
second
me
book that
there.
I just yeah, the second book that I just finished. It's called Where the Lost Wander, and it's a book that takes place along the Oregon Trail. And yeah, I just am obsessed with her writing, her way that she makes history like come alive. The romance in them is fantastic. And yeah, like I said, I have two books that I've just ordered that are supposed to be delivered this week.
I'll have to look up that author because I'm like, I struggle sometimes getting into just historical fiction. If it has fantasy,
Hmm.
then great, but just historical fiction. So I'll have to look up that author in those books and see what I think of
Yeah.
him. And then what are you working on currently?
Okay, so I'm kind of in a weird in between spot with my writing. So the Never Air, or not Never Air, but my book three is with my critique partner right now. I'm getting ready. I'll get those back in a month or two, and then I'll be deep into editing. But for right now, because I'm at the end of my trilogy, I'm working on something totally brand new that I'm planning to release probably in 2026. And so that's kind of been fun to start a new project and work on something totally different.
Ah, that's so exciting. And then where can readers find you?
So I'm most active on Instagram. My Instagram handle is at Court Millecam. I also send out a monthly newsletter with kind of writing updates, some book recommendations, and kind of some other favorite things that have been happening that month. And so you can sign up for my newsletter. Also, on if you go to my Instagram or my website, CourtneyMillecam.com, there's a link there or my newsletter.
Okay, perfect. And we'll have links to all of those in the show notes. And then to anyone who's watching this on YouTube, it'll be in the description below. Thank you so much, Courtney, for coming
Yeah.
on. I loved learning more about your journey and then about your books. And I am just so excited for your future projects.
Thank you so much. This was so fun.